I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the Ohio Rehabilitation Association's webcast. This presentation is part of Webcast Series 1 and will focus on microaggressions. The picture for this slide shows a smiling face with a zipper for the mouth as a way to depict microaggressions. In many ways, microaggressions are unintended discrimination, but they are still a form of discrimination. This presentation will discuss how microaggressions, a brief reflection on the term's history. In addition, different themes related to microaggression will be highlighted. Finally, there will also be a discussion regarding how microaggressions have been seen in the areas of counseling, education, and vocational rehabilitation. The objectives for this seminar, as highlighted to the credentialing bodies, include defining microaggressions and understanding the history, identifying the negative implications of microaggressions, and discussing examples of microaggressions and how we can impact change. Let's start with a general definition of microaggressions. Microaggressions is an unintended action that is insulting, demeaning, or dismissive to people who are members of marginalized groups. Let's look a little bit at the history of microaggressions. The term microaggressions was coined by Chester M. Pierce, a Harvard psychiatrist in the 1970s. It was originally adopted and applied to the dismissal and insults towards Black Americans from non-Black Americans. In 1973, Mary Rowe, an MIT economist, extended microaggressions towards women. Today, microaggressions applies to any casual degradation of a marginalized group. It can include individuals with disabilities, gender issues, sexual minorities, or minorities. There are many ways in which microaggressions have been classified. According to Sue, an article written in 2007 identified 3 types of the current racial transgressions that were associated with microaggressions. The first of these is a microassault. This is a conscious or an intentional action or slurs, such as using racial epithets, displaying a swastika, or deliberately serving a white person before a person of color in a restaurant. Second area was micro-insults. These include verbal and nonverbal communications that subtly convey rudeness and insensitivity and demean a person's racial heritage or identity. An example is an employee who asked a colleague of color how she got her job, implying that she landed it through an affirmative action or quota system. The final area identified by Sue was micro-invalidations. These are communications that subtly exclude, negate, or nullify the thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of a person of color. For instance, a white person often asks Asian Americans where they were born, conveying the message that they are perpetually foreigners in their own land. Building a little bit on the history and trying to help individuals understand a little bit more about microaggressions, I wanted to be able to provide some examples from the literature. Wing Sue identified several actions that are considered gender-based microaggressions. As I pull up and read each of these items, I would like for you to think about a time where you may have witnessed someone who could have experienced one of these gender-based microaggressions. Sexual objectification. A sexist joke. Sexist language. Denial that sexism exists. Assumptions of traditional gender roles. Denial of individual sexism. While some of these things may be perceived as all in fun, such as a sexist joke or sexist language, if someone is truly bothered by this, and if it is indeed demeaning, it can be very easily categorized as a microaggression. It's important to remember that how you feel about something may be very different than how someone else feels. And if we continue to utilize gender-based microaggressions, we continue to create a division where in reality we need to be working on unification. Building on the previous examples and discussions on gender microaggressions, I would like to leave you with two specific examples that may help with the understanding of gender microaggressions. The first one comes from the concept of leftover women in China. Presently, there are 20 million more men than women in China. This is complicated by the fact that many men do not earn enough money to support a family. Many young female professionals find themselves single well into their mid-20s and beyond. This is considered a new phenomenon, for this was once a very traditional country. With their eye ever toward social engineering, the Chinese government is none too pleased with so many men being unable to find wives. Laying the pressure on thick, state media has started to refer to these single ladies as leftover women, which is pretty rough. Parents of unwed men and women will list their children in a weekly marriage market. The grounds are littered with posters advertising the eligible men and women, including their age, height, education, and income. But despite its thousands of listings each week, the marriage market is not a guaranteed answer. In response to this, many women have shared that they have been received feelings or experienced feelings as if their parents are selling their daughters. These women talk about how they are a disappointment to their family and their feelings that they need to apologize for not being married. Some women in China are told by their parents, "I won't die in peace unless you are married," and refer to their daughters as being too picky or being leftover women. Some of these daughters are taking a stand to deliver a new message. They started going to the weekly marriage market and posting their own profile. Some examples of these include women who have stated, "I don't want to get married just for the sake of marriage. I won't live happily that way." Another young woman posted, "Even if I'm alone, I will be happy, content, and have a good life." One daughter's message was, as opposed to the term leftover women, I have a great career, and there is another term called power women. During the video that I watched on the leftover women, there was one parent who verbalized to her daughter that she was beautiful, which gave the impression this was the first time she had ever shared that idea with her daughter. I encourage you to consider watching some of these videos on YouTube about leftover women, including those from SK-II or MSNBC. The second example of gender microaggressions that I want you to think about is the Like a Girl campaign. If you were to search for videos on the Like a Girl campaign, you hopefully will find one of the initial videos where they were asking groups of people similar questions. What does it look like for a girl to do certain things? The first video of this campaign asked young adult men and women to show what it looked like to run like a girl. In every case that they demonstrated, their arms were flailing around as they were running like a girl. The second question, what does it look like to fight like a girl? And again, the demonstration showed people flailing their arms around, trying to slap or scratch someone as a demonstration of how someone might fight like a girl. The final question, what's it like to throw like a girl? And many of the examples included a very wimp throw where the person was barely able to get the ball away from them in the act of throwing. The video shifted gears a little bit and moved on to asking children of various ages the same questions. What's it like to run like a girl? And many of the girls ran really hard and ran really fast. What's it like to fight like a girl? And the girls fought really hard and closed their fists and acted like they were fighting. Finally, what's it like to throw like a girl? And they grabbed the imaginary ball and they acted like they were throwing it as hard as they possibly could. The message in the Like a Girl campaign is one simple question. When did like a girl become an insult? So as you think about the leftover women in China and how the young women of China are trying to change the message to being a focus on power women, and when you think about the Like a Girl campaign and you think about how young children, boys and girls, perceived like a girl to be something to be proud of, whereas adults maybe did not, those are great examples in my mind of microaggressions. As we move into examples of microaggressions in the area of race, there are many ways in which this can exist. These include on the axes of skin color, race, and culture. Again, as I read through this list, I would like you to take a moment and see if you can think about items or occasions where you feel someone could have experienced a microaggression with respect to one of these areas. Fetishization of people of color. Essentially, this means being excessively or irrationally devoted to people of color. Racist jokes. Racist language. Denial that racism exists. Race realism and denial of individual racism. Let's talk a little bit about a couple of examples of racial microaggressions. I've had the opportunity on several occasions to watch some of the videos in the talks with Jane Elliott about living as an African American. She has done trainings in a formal setting and in popular college settings. And in one such video, in her training, she asked an audience of individuals who were white who wanted to live and receive the same treatment as black members of their society. No one took the opportunity to stand. And she questioned, did you understand my option for you? And again, asked anyone to stand who was willing to live and receive the same treatment as the black members of their society. As this short video wrapped up, she made it very clear that the underlying message is that you may recognize what is happening in a society and choose not to have this for yourself. She goes on to strengthen this message by asking people, why is it okay for you to say, I don't want to live like this, but in turn accept the fact that many black Americans are being treated poorly. Another video by Jane Elliott addressed similar conversations on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and she has also done training with college students with a strong focus on blue eyes, brown eyes exercise. I encourage you to go to YouTube and watch some of these videos because it may give you a different perspective on racial microaggressions. I also like to point out that there are other racial microaggressions that are out there. You can find many examples against African Americans, but you can also find examples against other individuals. I bring this up because we need to consider the impact of the language we're using when we talk about people. If you group all Southern white men into a single category, are you creating a microaggression? If you group all Mexicans or all Europeans or all Middle Eastern into one category or individual categories, are you creating microaggressions? I challenge everyone to take the time and think about how the language they are choosing to use can be impacting folks, be that a conscious or an unconscious decision that you make. I want to move on to some information about religious microaggressions. This information comes from the Journal of Muslim Mental Health in an article written by Nadal, Griffin, and Riviera in 2012. They provide us with 6 different examples of how religious microaggressions may be categorized. The first one is endorsing religious stereotypes. This includes statements or behaviors that communicate false, presumptuous, or incorrect perceptions of certain religious groups. For example, they might have that stereotype that a Muslim person is a terrorist or a Jewish person is cheap. The next is exoticization. Instances where people view other religions as trendy or foreign. An individual who dresses in a certain religious garb or garments for fashion or for pleasure rather than as showing respect for the religion. Next is the pathology of different religious groups. This includes statements and behaviors in which individuals equate certain religious practices or traditions as being abnormal, sinful, or deviant, telling someone that they are wrong in their religion. Next is assumption of one's own religious identity as the norm. Comments or behaviors that convey people's presumptions that their religion is the standard and that they behave accordingly. Using greetings like Merry Christmas or God bless you after someone sneezes conveys one perception that everyone is Christian or believes in God. Please do not make the assumption that I'm saying that we should stop using phrases like Merry Christmas or God bless you, but you may also want to consider how this can be perceived by others. The next one is assumptions of religious homogeneity. Statements in which individuals assume that every believer of a religion practices the same customs or has the same beliefs as an entire group. For example, assuming that all Muslims wear head coverings. And the final one is denial of religious prejudice. As we move on to additional examples of religious microaggressions, I found several that were referenced in different articles and websites. Against Muslims, asking someone if they heard about a bombing plan at their local mosque. Asking a Muslim if they're hot in that thing, referring to the variety of head coverings that someone might be wearing. Referring to someone who is Jewish as being a penny pincher or being greedy, or telling someone that maybe they need to get themselves a good Jewish lawyer. The final area of examples that I'm going to put out is those associated with disability. I've selected this because of the fact that we are working with individuals in the area of disabilities, both in rehabilitation, social work, and counseling. The first microaggression can be the denial of personal identity. This occurs when any aspect of a person's identity other than a disability is ignored or denied. Simple things like seeing someone who is disabled and saying something like, "I can't believe you're married." Another statement that might fall into this is, "There's no part of your life that is normal or like mine." The final example, the only thing when I see you is your disability. Denial of disability experience. This occurs when disability-related experiences are minimized or denied. One such statement that may impact this is something like, "Come on now, we all have some disability." Second statement, "Your thoughts and feelings are probably not real and certainly not important to me." The next example is denial of privacy. This often occurs when personal information is required about a disability. For example, simply asking, "What happened to you?" You're not allowed to maintain disability information privately could be another statement. In both of these cases, we're denying that individual the right to privacy. The next is helplessness. This occurs when people frantically try to help a person with a disability. You may find someone helps you onto a bus or train even when you need no help. Someone feels incapable of rescuing you from your disability. The belief that you can't do anything by yourself because you have a disability. The view that a disability is catastrophic, or even extreme statements like, "I would rather be dead than be you." Secondary gain occurs when a person expects to feel good or be praised for doing something for a person with a disability. "We're going to raise enough money tonight to get Johnny that new wheelchair." Other occasions might be when someone feels good and gets recognition for being nice to you. Spread effect. The spread effect occurs when other expectations about a person are assumed due to one specific disability. You might hear things such as, "Those deaf people are retarded." "Your other senses must be better than mine." "Your disability invalidates you in all areas." "You must be special in some way." "You are not normal." Or "You have a spidey sense." Infantilization occurs when a person with a disability is treated like a child. This may happen when people say things like, "Let me do that for you," "You're not really capable of doing that," or "I know better than you how to do this." Patronization. This occurs when a person with a disability is praised for almost anything. Issues and concerns where people say, "You people are so inspiring." "You are so special for living with that." Second-class citizens. This occurs when people with disabilities' rights to equality is denied because they are considered to be bothersome, expensive, a waste of time, effort, or resources. Examples of how this might occur: people work hard not to make eye contact or physically avoid a person with a disability. A person in a wheelchair has to wait 15 minutes outside of a restaurant for access through the kitchen and then has to complain to the manager. At a staff meeting, the question is raised about improving accessibility to the restaurant, and the official plan is that charges will be made when more people with disabilities come here to eat. People with disabilities are viewed as disgusting and should be avoided. Comments like "those people expect too much and are so difficult to work with. They have no patience." And finally, example would be, "Your rights to equality are not important to me." The final area under disabilities is desexualization. This often occurs when the sexuality and sexual being is denied. You might hear phrases like, "I would never date someone who uses a wheelchair," or "People with disabilities are not my equal, not attractive, and not worthy of being with me." I hope as you have heard some of these phrases, some of these things being stated, that you have a moment of concern that our society still has these beliefs and are still expressing these types of issues and concerns. I find it personally hard to swallow that there are still companies out there that would say, "We really don't need to create a ramp to get in because nobody with a disability comes in our restaurant." The reality is they can't come in your restaurant. So if you think about the idea that, if you make it accessible, maybe they will, can be a whole different perspective on things. As we move on to examples of disability microaggression, there are a couple of places where I have really found some great information that I feel should help you in understanding this. There is a group that has created video clips that discuss microaggression activities. These are located at barrierfreemd.com/videos, and that's spelled BARRIERFREEMB.com/videos. The first one that I watched was from the program Talk, which portrays a society in which non-disabled people are pitted minorities and the disabled people live full and active lives. The second one is entitled Closing the Gap, and it's a powerful documentary depicting the real-life experiences of 4 people with learning disabilities and/or mental health problems in primary health care. Both of these types of microaggressions can give you some good insight into how our actions may or may not be causing the problem. Some more things to think about with respect to microaggressions. The following slides are full of pictures. Each pictures will be described to you, and you'll have a moment to think about how this could be considered a microaggression. If you find that this is something that you maybe have participated in or witnessed, it'll give you the opportunity to reflect on what you might do differently the next time. As a reminder, as each picture is brought up, you will get a description of the picture, followed by 10 to 15 seconds to allow you to think about what this picture might mean. The first picture in the upper left-hand corner depicts 2 individuals talking. The character on the left is blue, the character on the right is orange, and the statement is, "It's not black and white." The second picture is a speech bubble that you might see in a variety of environments, and this speech bubble says, "That's so ghetto." The third picture is a person who is holding a sign in their left hand that is facing away from them, and the sign says, "So, like, what are you?" As we move on to the next slide, we have a post-it note, and on this post-it note is written the phrase, "You don't sound black," and black is underlined twice. The next one is a printed sign that says, "You're my favorite Asian." I titled this next slide, "Snitch versus Neighbor." In the upper left-hand corner, you have a picture of two houses with people greeting one another. On the left side, you've got a house that has two people in front of it who are greeting the house on the right side, which has one person. I depict this to be the idea of neighbors seeing one another or meeting one another for the first time. In the lower right-hand corner, there's a stop sign, and on this stop sign, there's been an addition made so that it reads, "Stop snitching." Now you might wonder why I selected the idea of snitching versus neighbor in regards to microaggressions. I've had the opportunity to work with a local community group, and as part of this there was a nice presentation by a group of individuals who were reaching out to try and make changes in their neighborhood. And one of the things that they try to get across to people is that your neighborhood means that you can have a degree of responsibility for what is going on in that neighborhood. And they didn't take this to mean that if there's crime at your next door neighbor's house that you're the one who's responsible. But they did note that if you witness a crime and you do nothing about it, you are not helping your neighborhood. So what this comes down to is, are you being a neighbor, which is a much more positive term with respect to what it is that you're doing, when you take action to try and come out and put a stop to the activities and negative behaviors that are going on in your neighborhood? Or are you being a snitch? In reality, you're being a neighbor. A snitch is someone who tells on someone in order to get something back for themselves. So if you have two individuals who have committed a crime and one chooses to snitch and tell that this other person is the one who was really responsible in hopes of being able to have a lesser sentence, that person is being a snitch. If you witness something in your neighborhood that doesn't seem right, and you call the police and make a report with respect to that, that's being a neighbor. The next picture I've got is a person, a male depicted person, who is holding a sign, "You have a mental disability? You seem perfectly normal to me." So again, I'm going to give you a few moments to think about this microaggression. Our next picture has a person in the background, and the phrase in front says, "That's crazy. So crazy it just might work." The final picture I have, I actually heard this with respect to many times on Facebook in the past several weeks. And while in many cases it kind of seems funny, it truly is a microaggression. In this case, you have a picture of someone standing on the side in a winter hat, winter coat, gloves, and a mitten, and they've depicted that they have exhaled and that they can see their breath. The caption associated with this says, "Dear Mother Nature, get back on your meds, pop open a bottle of wine, and start thinking warm." So again, take a few seconds and think about what this microaggression might really be saying to someone who has a mental health condition. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some microaggressions in different settings that may be appropriate for human services professionals. The first setting is going to be the counseling environment. The Society for Humanistic Psychology's newsletter in October of 2012 had an article by Granger titled Microaggressions and Their Effects on the Therapeutic Process. In this article, Granger noted that when microaggressions are unknowingly and inappropriately delivered by the helping profession, communication clarity and credibility are going to suffer, with the possibility of creating a rupture or impasse in the helping relationship. Essentially speaking, just what we would expect. If we're not addressing these types of issues and concerns, we can damage the relationship that we have with our clients. Granger went on to talk about how the critical consciousness and awareness needs to be addressed, because when it is lacking, when one is fearing about clarifying the meaning of those tension-filled interactions, when one actively avoids pursuing an understanding of those dynamics, the offense remains invisible. And when things are invisible, clearly we're not getting to the root issues. If we continue to avoid race topics, then we know that there has been a concerned link with the conspiracy of silence. Granger also noted how Sue reported on the fact that making the invisible visible is the first step in combating those unconscious and unintentional racial, sexism, heterosexism, and other forms of bigotry festering under the sheath of microaggressions. All of these things can be very helpful when we're looking at how that microaggression can impact us in that therapeutic process. In that Granger 2012 article, he identified principles to employ that can help us lessen the effects of those microaggressions in therapy. All of these principles focus on how the counselor should learn more in an attempt to address microaggressions. The principles identified allow the counselor to take an active role in that overall process, but that doesn't mean that other individuals within the society don't also have to take that active role. Granger's principles: learn about people of color, women, and LGBTs from the sources within the group. Learn from healthy and strong people of that group. Learn from the experiential reality. Learn from constant vigilance of bias and fears. Learn by being committed to personal action against racism, sexism, and heterosexualism. Some additional examples of counseling microaggressions comes from Williams in his 2013 article, How Well-Meaning Therapists Commit Racism. What are the nice things therapists say that drive away minority clients? And I'd like to give you a couple of examples of this. The first one deals with language skills. So if someone were to say to a non-white client with no accent, "You speak good English, where are you from?" The insinuation is that you clearly couldn't be from the United States if you are non-white but don't have an accent. The second one is the assumption that individuals will understand all types of discrimination. So anyone who says, as a gay person, I know just what it's like to be discriminated against because of race. This is making an assumption that the discrimination is identical for all persons, and that because I know of one type of discrimination, I clearly know how it feels in other types of discrimination as well. And that is not necessarily the case. The third example given by Williams comes across from the idea of being strong. So statements like, I'm sure you can cope with this problem as a strong black woman. Being a strong black woman, a strong man, doesn't necessarily mean that someone can automatically cope with problems. They still may need support and assistance, and it's important from the counselor perspective that we're not making those generalizations. Issues with cultural norms. Williams talked about phrases like, it might be okay for some people to cope by drinking because of their cultural norms. That suggests that because the cultural norm accepts drinking, that makes it okay for some people to utilize that as coping, but may not be a case for somebody with a different cultural perspective. All of these things can come into play and can cause concerns. Discounting racism is another concern. Let's hope you weren't treated that way due to racism. What are some of the other possible explanations? Williams utilized that phrase as a way to say that you're giving that discounting of that impression of racism. And it's important that we're not discounting individuals' feelings and their perception of things. The final example given by Williams was the phrase, I don't usually do this, but I can waive your fees if you can't afford to pay for counseling. Now again, in some cases you might perceive this as doing something good for a client who needs your support, but you may also be making an assumption that they cannot afford to pay for the counseling when in reality they can. The second example area that I want to work on is the environment of education. This particular picture was taken from Ed Weekly and provides several examples of how education and the educational environment can create opportunities for microaggressions. In one case, an instructor may assume that a student is having trouble with a specific topic, like math or science, because girls tend to have more difficulty in math and science while they're more proficient in art. Obviously, that's clearly an assumption because we have many men who are good in art. We have many women who are good in the arts and the math and sciences. So we shouldn't make an assumption that someone would have trouble on a lab assignment or anything along the lines of a specific topic because of their gender. The second example that was given by Ed Weekly was an instructor that made a statement to a class indicating that there was a reminder about an online research project that was due on Friday. After making this announcement to the class, the instructor singled out Gabe and advised Gabe that he could use the computer lab at lunch to be able to work on his assignment. The underlying assumption here is that he has essentially singled that student out in front of his peers because of not having internet access at home. Obviously, calling someone out in front of their peers can lead to many problems, but in the underlying perspective of that, it just simply isn't appropriate. Ed Weekly's third example was dealing with a science project in which they were going to be working on pig anatomy. In this particular example, the instructor advised the male student to perform the dissection and the female student to take notes. Again, this is an assumption that the female student would choose not to do the hands-on work with respect to the dissection. If you look at this picture, and again as a reminder, this is from Ed Weekly, and it's a classroom environment. In the front of the class you have the teacher, and to the left you have an African American female student who is standing at the front of the class. The suggestion that was made in this was that someone asked this student, "Are you in the right room? This is AP Biology." So you wonder, are they making a suggestion that the student doesn't look like someone who is capable of doing advanced work in AP Biology? Are they making an assumption that she can't do AP Biology work because of her gender? Because of her race? What is the status with respect to that? Is it just simply how she looks? Any way you look at that, they're basically making an assumption and potentially creating a microaggression towards this person by the way in which they phrase their question. The last example from Ed Weekly is a statement with respect to additional support. In this particular example, the phrase was, "Oh, Caroline, you're from Carver High. You should probably sign up for our after-school tutoring program." The assumption behind this is that the student is coming from a high-poverty school. Clearly, they would be academically behind and need the additional tutoring support. Again, just because someone comes from a high-poverty school doesn't necessarily mean that they're academically behind, and maybe in reality they have excelled and should be signing up to be a tutor in the after-school tutoring program. Hopefully these different examples can show how we make innocent comments that are not intended to be harmful, but can truly create that environment of microaggression. So what can you do? Obviously, when we look at being able to share information about a topic, it's important to be able to give that foundational knowledge, but also identify what can we do differently to put a stop to microaggression, to either make a change in ourselves, to be able to look at changes in someone else, and decide what it is that we might need to be able to address. So I have several things that have come from a variety of resources that can help us when we're looking at microaggressions. First, remain calm and take a deep breath. We want to first pause and find a way to prevent ourselves from assuming or reacting right away. If we respond with anger, it'll only work against the overall problem and concerns. You need to take the time to honor and process your feelings by reaching out to those who are in your corner when you're experiencing microaggressions. If you were to get angry about the comments that someone is making, you might ultimately get labeled as emotional, which is again another microaggression. That adjective can generally be described when someone who can't handle the pressures. Now granted, we can say that that label's not fair because they were having an emotional reaction to something that was said to them. But by becoming agitated, we're most likely accomplishing one thing, and that is basically taking away the power and authority of expressing our own beliefs and making you feel temporarily undermined in your overall reputation. So you want to really consider if you experience a microaggression, to remain calm, take a deep breath, and think about how you might react to that in a more calm and appropriate manner and be able to try and address it from a bigger picture perspective. The second recommendation is giving the benefit of doubt. Taking an extreme stance, either as a victim or a tough person, is ultimately going to hurt you. You might want to start by asking for some clarification, of course, after you've taken the breath that we talked about in the previous slide. Take note of the person's response. Take time to think it over. Again, decide how you're going to respond. While it is true that minority groups are going to experience the bulk of microaggressions, that doesn't mean that if you're not in a minority situation that you won't also experience those microaggressions. You might indeed be the one who's taking that step back and thinking, wow, I shouldn't have said that way, or I should really explain myself, and making a change. By seeing ourselves as victims, if we are experiencing microaggressions, we can in reality be helping the aggressor disempower us. We don't necessarily want to have to tough it out and just let things slide and not address them, but we really want to be able to take a breath, take note of the response, think about what we need to do, and then take appropriate calm action to address the microaggressions. The next recommendation is focus on the event, not on the person. Direct your conversation to the behavior or the event or the comment that will decrease the likelihood of defensiveness. It's not about this person or that person being a bad person. It is about the statement that they made being a microaggression. Any attempts to handle those microaggressions, making the situation about you and them, generates a power struggle that will tilt in favor of those in a majority. So it's not about you talking bad about me, it's about the statement itself and being able to look Look at the comments. Complaining about someone who is microaggressing you means that you're likely in the minority, and that power struggle is going to tilt away from you if you just address the person and not the event. We also want to be clear about the different elements of a microaggression. Who said or did what? Who was in the room? What is the relationship between you and the sender of that microaggression? Was this the first time, or is this an ongoing issue? Having a clear understanding of the factors that surround the microaggressions help evaluate the next steps strategically rather than emotionally. And again, while we may have that emotional response, taking that step back, taking a deep breath, is going to give us that opportunity to be able to respond calmly and objectively with respect to dealing with these microaggressions. Ultimately, you need to develop your own way to handle a microaggression. As with many circumstances in life, there's really no cookie cutter approach that's going to fix things and be able to create this ideal situation where you can address a microaggression. Microaggressions and micro inequalities that you experience might appear to be similar to what others experience, but the context that surrounds the event and the effects created are not the same. So we always want to think about when we're looking at this, just because I may experience it one way doesn't mean that you're going to experience it the same way. And therefore, I need to have a way for myself to handle it, and you may have a different way for you to handle it. Lead by example. I think this is one of the most important factors that you can look at when we're trying to address microaggressions. If you hear something, know that you can say something. Just because something is not directed at you doesn't mean that we should idly stand by and let things continue without addressing those actions and those behaviors. It's really important, if you hear something that you feel is inappropriate, take a stand and say something about it. Again, remain calm, remain objective, because you don't want to get into a disagreement and a shouting match with someone, but it really is important for you to consider what you're going to, how you're going to say something and what you're going to say, so that you can indeed try and address the concerns and problems. As I think about the idea of leading by example, I'm reminded of a quote that has been attributed to Edward Burke. This quote reads, "All that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." I find this very useful when considering how we need to take action to stop things that are not in line with the future we desire for ourselves, our family and friends, our community, and even our world. As we look at taking action, we want to remind ourselves that we have the ability to make changes in our environment and to be able to improve the perspective of the world around us. This wraps up the presentation on microaggressions. The post-test authorization code is going to be Tom. You will see that there is a link to the post-test survey, which you can utilize in this process. If you have any trouble with the link, you can go back to the Ohio Rehab Association site and be able to see the link to each of the individual surveys. If you have questions about this presentation or about the other webcasts that are provided by the Ohio Rehabilitation Association, please send an email to info@ohioRehab.org. You can also reach out to us on the website. Our website is www.ohio.rehab.org. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.